Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending upon what corner of the world you're calling in from. I'm Mark Higgins, the Chief Operating Officer of Strategen, and I am delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Energy Storage in Emerging Markets, a Global Perspective, produced by Strategen and sponsored by Energy Storage North America. As a veteran of the energy industry, I've spent most of my career working in renewables and storage, and I can honestly say that the pace of technological change in our industry seems to be accelerating towards the point of singularity. From the rapid growth in renewables to the absolutely remarkable democratization and interest in the role of storage on the grid over the past couple of years, we're fortunate now to have a clear pathway for a cheaper, cleaner grid, no matter what country you're in, and an amazing new toolkit to advance electrification in the most far-flung corners of the globe. During today's webinar, we'll have the leading market expert from IHS Markit explore the rapid growth of storage opportunities in emerging markets around the world, a perspective of NANT Energy, a world-leading technology provider, on opportunities and challenges in these markets, and an exciting update from World Bank on their new program to help remove barriers, resolve challenges, and accelerate the deployment of storage in markets around the world. But before we get started, some logistical items. The first 45 minutes of our webinar today are going to be for panelist presentations. The final 15 minutes will be reserved for questions. For those of you who are not familiar with GoToWebinar, this screenshot shows the control panel. The most important part of the control panel is the questions section. This is where you can type in any questions you may have during the webinar, and we will answer them during the question and answer session. Due to the large number of attendees at today's webinar, all participants have been muted, and we will only be taking written questions. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording and slides will be made available to you after the webinar. They'll be available at strategen.com/webinars, where you can also see an archive of all of our past webinars. The slides for today's webinar are also available in the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. So first, a little bit about Strategen for those that are new to our firm. We're a firm that specializes in grid transformation, policy, markets, and strategy. Well, we got our start helping shape California's energy transition. We now work with governments, utilities, market participants, and technology providers all around the world on new grid technology, including, but not limited to, energy storage. But enough about my firm. If the information in today's webinar is interesting to you, we highly encourage you to consider attending ESNA 2019. It's going to be located in San Diego, California on November 5th through 7th. It is the largest energy storage conference and expo in North America, bringing together over 2,000 stakeholders from more than 30 countries every year. This year's theme is all about innovation, innovative technologies, business models, policies, markets, etc. We've actually got a call for speakers open right now, and at an event that prides itself on having leading-edge educational content about the big challenges and opportunities in the industry, this is a great way to get involved and have your voice heard on very important issues in the industry. One very exciting announcement this year is that, building on our focus on global grid transformation issues, we are excited to say that we're going to be we've been selected by the state of California and the German federal government to host the California-Germany Bilateral Energy Conference, which is going to be at the event this year on November 5th. So as I mentioned, if you're interested in the content of today's webinar, please stay tuned for updates on our global grid track at ESNA on November 6th. So I feel great about the panelists that we have on today's webinar. We are very fortunate to have some very exciting presentations. Our first presentation today is going to be by Julian Jansen from IHS Markit. He is calling in all the way from London, and he is a research and analysis manager at IHS Markit Technology and leads the group's global research on stationary energy storage, providing deep insight on the key value drivers and emerging business models, accelerating storage deployment across Europe, North America, and the world. Next up, after that, we'll have Ray Schnell. He is the Global Business Development Leader from NANT Energy, and he is a true industry veteran, bringing over 30 years of leadership in business development, operations, engineering, and technology management in the energy storage and semiconductors industry. He joined NANT, which was then called Fluidic, in January of 2010 to commercialize their rechargeable zinc air energy storage solution. And after that technology launch, he actually spent a good deal of time in Indonesia leading manufacturing and field services. And since his return to the United States in January 2013, he's been leading the Latin America and U.S. market development efforts for the company. Finally, we will have Fernando de Cisternes and Heather Worley from the World Bank presenting about World Bank's new energy storage initiative. Fernando leads the Variable Renewable Grid Integration Program at World Bank, the World Bank's Energy Management Assistance Program, or also called FMAP. Since joining the World Bank in 2016, he's worked with teams in West Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East on strategic energy planning, energy security, regional market integration, and renewable energy grid integration. We also have his colleague, Heather Worley, who is the Senior Strategy and Operations Officer at World Bank. She's got 18 years of experience in international strategic communication and public awareness campaigns in the energy sector, and her work specializes on the intersection of energy and the behavioral sciences, having helped clients in Africa, East Asia, South Asia, and Eastern Europe design and implement evidence-based public affairs strategies and behavior change campaigns on a range of energy and environment issues. All right, so first up, we will now turn to Julian Jansen from IHS Markit to talk about where we're at with emerging economies and energy storage. Julian.
Great, thank you very much for the warm introduction, Mark, and yeah, good to speak to everyone on the webinar today. So let's jump straight in it. So I'll talk a little bit about our perspective on the development of energy storage in emerging markets. And one of the big questions we usually get asked is, how big can the energy storage market really be? And for me and for the team here at IHS Markit, we always like to compare the storage market to a bit of a child who's desperate to be as big as possible, but it's still quite a small, immature market. There are lots of lessons to be learned and lots of experience to be had and skills to be gained before it can realize its full potential. So in that sense, it is still like a child trying to grow. To answer the question of how big the market can be, if we jump to the next slide, the way we see it here at IHS Markit to try to answer this is that it's actually quite complicated because there's lots of ways you can measure the market and look at it. So it's whether it's in power installed, so in gigawatts, whether it's energy capacity installed in gigawatt hours, revenues achieved in the market, or how big individual markets can be. But in short, really what we see is that by 2025, we expect close to 60 gigawatts of stationary energy storage to be installed on the grid. And by that, we don't include pumped hydro. So this is specifically focusing on battery energy storage. We expect a cumulative installed base of over 150 gigawatt hours of energy storage capacity, and close to 10 markets that have reached or that have installed over 1 gigawatt of stationary energy storage systems. And if we want to put a bit more flavor onto this and look how the markets are developing specifically, if we jump to the next slide, what you can see here is our key. Can we jump to the next slide, please? Oh yeah, what you can see here is our key forecast for the global stationary energy storage industry, just in a little bit more detail. So what you can see here on the left-hand side, the axis depicts the annual energy storage installations in megawatt, while the axis on the right depicts the annual revenues earned based on hardware revenues only. And really what we saw in 2018, it was the first year we really saw exponential growth in the industry. And historically, the market has really been driven by some of the traditional strongholds of the early energy storage market development, in particular the United States, driven first by frequency regulation projects in PJM and later by peaking capacity projects in California. The Japanese market, which developed some of the earliest projects and has been a traditionally strong residential market, as well as some of the major European markets such as Germany and the UK, where frequency regulation and residential applications have been driving historic growth. Going forward, we do expect the market to accelerate quite quickly, especially from 2020 onwards. And this is where the emerging markets come in, because in the very short term, we still see those traditional strongholds leading market development. But from 2020 onwards, we see more and more emerging markets making a play in the global storage industry. And I will use today's presentation to highlight some of these opportunities in particular. So we jump to the next slide. What we see here at IHS Markit is that as markets mature, as system costs improve, and as policy and regulations evolve, storage is able to participate in more than one application. And what we've seen historically is that markets have been driven by individual use cases. So if we think about some of the major markets I've already mentioned, it's been often based on frequency regulation as the easiest application to be accessed, behind the meter is being driven by self-consumption optimization, peak shaving, and backup power. But if we jump to the next slide, what we now see is that a growing number of applications are beginning to drive the market on both sides of the meter. And really, some of the emerging economies and emerging countries that are starting to see particular growth in stationary energy storage, these are very strongly moving away from this core applications and helping us to understand and develop some of the new applications, whether that's renewable enhancement, such as time-shifting solar, or controlling ramp rate, whether that's the enhancement of conventional generation, such as diesel generators, or whether that's the deferral and investment into transmission and distribution infrastructure. So if we look at some particular countries, on the next slide, what we're showing here is a split by annual grid-connected energy storage installations by individual country. As you can see here, in 2018, around 90% of the market was dominated by the 7 biggest markets: the US, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, the UK, and Germany. While the rest of the world accounted for quite a small piece of the pie. But we see now the global market to be increasingly driven by these core markets, but also by other countries emerging onto the scene. So what we really see is that geographic diversity is expanding quite rapidly. And specifically, jumping to the next slide, if we want to look at some individual countries and regions that we would class as emerging, we see quite a strong growth trajectory compared to what the overall market is doing. So we expect, if we take these 6 core regions, South Africa and the rest of Africa, the Middle East, India, South and Central America, and then particularly Southeast Asia, we expect that these countries will install 1.5 gigawatts of stationary energy storage by 2023. And the opportunities are highly diverse across these various markets. And jumping onto the next slide, what I'd like to do is just highlight a couple of the drivers that are behind those specific numbers. So if we look towards South and Central America, this is a market that has been highlighted by very strong and quite dramatic growth in solar PV penetration. And that's leading to more and more challenges, both from a transmission and distribution grid management side, but also for the energy market and understanding the ability to time shift that generation away from the day into the evening peak. So what we're seeing now is that across the region, regulators, policymakers, utilities, very actively exploring how they can utilize energy storage to time shift solar PV production to help enhance transmission infrastructure, which is heavily constrained, especially in markets such as Chile and Mexico, but also to look how storage can help electrify rural areas and help to mitigate some of the challenges that we see in power demand growth, such as Brazil, where the energy regulator has been running a pilot program over the last 2 years. Beyond that, if we jump to the next region, I think one area that I would like to highlight in particular is South Africa. And especially the reason I want to highlight this is because the local utility, Eskom, is really having very strong development plans to accelerate energy storage within the market. But what I think is quite important here is that it highlights one of the crucial challenges that energy storage is facing around financing. And I think it's great to have the World Bank on the webinar today as well to highlight a little bit more as how they can help countries develop their energy storage market through providing access to finance. And then the last area that I'd like to focus on is India, because we expect India to be installing more than 6 gigawatt hours of new energy storage through 2025. And that's really driven by a big push from a government and regulatory side to develop utility scale solar plus storage projects to help decarbonize the power sector, but also to support distribution networks that are struggling with the increasing demand and increasing renewable penetration. So if we summarize this, and I know there's a lot of opportunities to jump through here and a lot of different countries, but if we really want to kind of distill the core messages, what is driving these markets? If we jump to the next slide, what I've done is just really briefly summarize this. On the one hand is the rapidly falling cost and increasing contribution of renewables. And that's really enabling both flexible renewable generation with storage, but it's also creating a need for longer duration energy storage to help shift that increase in power production from renewables into the evening. And I think it's fantastic to have an alternative technology provider on the webinar today who might highlight some of those needs for long duration energy storage. At the same time, we see a desire by customers, both residential and commercial and industrial customers in emerging markets, to increase their energy independence, but especially their reliability of supply. And energy storage in combination with traditional generation assets such as diesel and renewable generation assets such as solar can significantly increase the reliability for those customers and really support them leapfrogging the traditional or centralized grid infrastructure paradigm that we've seen in the West over the past century. And then the last part that's worth highlighting is that as we're seeing a big drive towards electrification in many emerging markets, there's a real need to upgrade and enhance transmission and distribution infrastructure. And energy storage can really provide a key flexible and lower cost asset to support those grids in those markets and accelerate through energy transition across emerging economies. But of course, there's a few roadblocks. So jumping onto the next slide, I would like to particularly highlight two. The first one is regulation. In most of these countries and regions that we've highlighted, we've talked about very briefly, South and Central America, South Africa, India, really what we're seeing is that regulatory frameworks are very far behind what's necessary to enable energy storage to make a useful and economically feasible contribution to the energy transition. And, you know, in our eyes, what we need to look at is that these markets actually have a real opportunity from learning some of the mistakes that have been made in other countries and other regions when it comes to regulatory development. And through that, much quicker accelerate the industry in the domestic markets by avoiding some of those mistakes and maybe not go through the same laborious processes of regulatory redesign. The other core area I'd like to highlight is financing. Because what we are seeing in a lot of these regions is that energy storage often makes economic sense, whether that's as a way to increase reliability or time shift renewable generation, or whether that's as a T&D infrastructure asset. But the challenge a lot of these countries have is both the access to financing, but also to receive the same favorable conditions infrastructure projects with a lower risk profile would get in developed countries. And I think, again, this is where the ability of multilateral organizations such as the World Bank comes in to provide more security and really enable financing to kickstart the energy storage industries in those markets. The last part I want to highlight, even though it's less of a big roadblock in emerging economies, but across the world, we're seeing increasing supply constraints for lithium-ion batteries. And we think that can really help enable alternative technologies, such as the one Ray from Man Energy will present later on. So we jump to the next slide. I'd just like to provide a brief illustration of why there will be certain supply constraints from the lithium-ion battery side for stationary energy storage. So what you see here on this graph is the annual global demand for lithium-ion batteries by sector. And as you can see, the gray bar is what represents the stationary energy storage sector. And as you can clearly see, with it accounting for less than 5% of global demand, and even less going forward, as the automotive and transport sector is rapidly expanding, is that the stationary storage sector will be a price taker for lithium-ion batteries. And as such, it is a necessity to at least evaluate alternative technologies and understand where other technologies outside of the lithium-ion battery space have their applications and can help accelerate those individual markets. That was my very brief overview. As you can see, it was I jumped through the slides fairly quickly because I want to give you the ability to ask questions, and we have another three great speakers on the webinar. But if I could just conclude the short presentation today on the next slide, I've just wanted to highlight some of our key messages. So as I mentioned earlier, we expect the global grid-connected energy storage market to be a significant growth opportunities with revenues, and when I say revenues here, it's only relating to hardware revenues, i.e. the storage system, excluding all project and soft installation costs. We expect those revenues to grow to $8.4 billion by 2025. We see the stronger acceleration from 2020 onwards, which will obviously be led by some of the core markets, but more and more by the emerging markets that I've highlighted throughout the webinar today. And throughout those markets, we still think that the front of the meter segment, so utility scale storage assets, will account for more than 50% of annual installations year by year. However, we do see more and more demand and interest from the behind the meter segment, and especially commercial and industrial customers across emerging markets are looking towards energy storage, solar, to help decarbonize their energy supply, but also at the same time make the energy supply more reliable and lower cost. I think the three core messages I would like to highlight is, in order to enable growth across these emerging markets, it's absolutely crucial to define energy storage within regulatory frameworks and highlight the role storage can play, enabling those markets to develop quicker and provide more access or wider access to electricity with a lower carbon footprint. But also it's crucial to enable the access to low-cost financing and provide project development expertise that's currently not existing in those markets. And finally, it's important to determine the best approaches to integrate and reward energy storage as pivotal assets to balance electricity supply and demand and accurately reflect the value they bring to the energy markets. So thank you so much for listening to my short summary presentation on how we see the global market or global emerging markets develop. If I could just highlight one last thing on the final slide. Everything I presented today, it was all taken from our Energy Storage Intelligence Service. And this really provides the most comprehensive coverage of the global stationary storage market across the world, covering everything from the supply chain across all different end markets, from residential to large utility scale applications. And with our global analyst team located across the world in Europe, North America, and several Asian countries, we really can provide you with the most depth and breadth of coverage and help you tackle these emerging markets and develop market entry strategies hand in hand together with our clients. If you have any questions on the topics I presented about today or some of our other research, please feel free to get in touch with myself. Or if you just want to read a little bit more on how the global storage industry is developing and how stakeholders can facilitate the advancement of the industry, I really suggest you download the white paper titled Global Grid Transformation. The link is on the slide here. This is a white paper we did together with ESMA last November, following the Global Grid Transformation Program at the conference. And it was a fantastic session speaking with stakeholders from all over the world and really highlighting some of the core challenges that are facing the industry everywhere. So with that, thank you so much. And I'll look forward to the other presentations. And as I said, please get in touch if you do have any questions.
Julian, thank you. That was a really insightful presentation. Definitely want to highlight to everybody, go online, download these slides if you want Julian's contact info. He's a great resource on what's happening in the world. So, please get in touch with him if you've got any further questions, and definitely download that white paper. It's a great resource as well. All right, next up we have Ray Schnell from Nant Energy. Ray, take it away.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for the warm introduction and the opportunity for us to present here in this forum. So next slide, please. So our mission in Nant Energy is really to deliver clean energy solutions that benefit people, businesses, and the planet. That's really what we're all about. Next slide. So Nant Energy was founded 13 years ago, back in 2006, with the intent of really solving the rechargeability and scalability of a zinc air technology. As you know, many of you may know that it's been under research over 70 years. The government has put in a lot of money into this technology because of the promise of having a very low cost base. Zinc air really truly can get to the lowest cost of energy stored. So we started this back in 2011. We started our demonstrators and we selected Indonesia. We thought it would be a very good beachhead for the company to start there. There was some big issues that they had that we thought we can help solve and improve the technology and mature it. So we started there, and we've invested over $200 million and have over 120 patents by now. in the zinc side of things. We are also researching new zinc chemistries to have a strong portfolio of different options and solving more use cases based on a technology that has earth abundant materials where supply would not be constrained, and that's what we're all about. We've targeted basically three areas. One is the microgrids, telecom, and recently we got into the commercial industrial segment by acquiring a Sharp Electronics division here in the U.S. We have installed over 3,000 systems now, which have over 120,000 cells, all of them monitored. We have the information. We know what's happening in every discharge in our data center. We're in over 10 countries, and we've delivered over 6.3 gigawatt hours of electricity in 2018. So we're pretty happy about the amount of energy we're delivering and helping these communities. We're headquartered in LA and in Phoenix, and we have a licensed regional manufacturer in Indonesia for the Asian countries. And back in January of 2018, Dr. Patrick Suncion became the majority investor, and he has since then really put a lot of emphasis on energy, a lot of support in accelerating our developments and getting a lot more aggressive in our introduction of new technologies. Next slide. So when you look at Zinc Air, this is a technology that really takes a lot of positive attributes of other technologies. Well, fuel cells, one of the great things that they have is that they use oxygen, and we do too. It's a free element, and it's 50% of our energy. So that comes free using that type of technology. You look at the other side where you have the lead acid batteries, lithium batteries. We're using a lot of the chemistry they're using, carbon-based chemistries pieces. We're not really using the scarce materials that they have. And on the other side, flow batteries, one of their big advantages is that they can decouple energy from power, which means you could have like a 8-hour product optimized around 8 hours at a low cost, and you can optimize a longer duration, like 24 hours, with a relatively small increase in cost, maybe 15 to 20%, which allows you to offer the product at a much lower cost per kilowatt than any other technology. So those are some of the interjections that we have in our technology that really puts us in a great position to rapidly reduce cost as we scale the company. Next slide. So the other thing we're doing is we are really combining the best of different chemistries. So we have a solution where we have a hybrid with lithium. So lithium is great at fast charging and fast discharging. It's really good on cycling, but is really more limited to fewer hours because of the cost associated with it and some of the thermal concerns. On the other side, we combine it with our Zinc Air technology that is really designed for a long duration. So you could take the use case of lithium and combine it with a long duration and achieve a much lower cost than just using one type of technology. The other thing we have that these other technologies don't have is we have the ability to be at a 100% state of charge without impacting the life of the product, or at 0% state of charge without impacting the life, which are really detrimental to these other technologies. We have a big advantage, especially in third world and growing economies where there's warm. We can have our solution without cooling it. It could be up to 50 degrees Celsius, and you don't need to cool it down, and you don't impact the life of the product. So those are really good advantages when you go into some of these rural locations where you just have to have a very sustainable, low maintenance kind of solution. Next slide. Can you switch to the next slide, Mark? Okay, I'm going to talk about a few cases. The next slide is going to talk about Indonesia. So back in 2014, 16, we engaged with the Indonesian government, and as you know, Indonesia is a country that has over 17,000 islands. Logistically is a very challenging, complex country. There is over 12,600 villages with no access to power, and over 2,500 that don't have any electricity at all. So the government decided to do something about their people and put some energy in these remote locations. And the big challenge is how do you provide energy at a low cost where you don't depend on diesel, because it's so far away to get there and expensive and it's difficult to maintain. So we partnered with the government and EPCs and designed a solution that was a solar and energy storage base only, using our hybrid solution, combining the advantages of lithium and zinc air. So we ended up deploying into 120 villages. We've electrified over 200,000 people that never had electricity in their life, and that in itself is such a great thing to have. You know, it just feels that we're making a big change in the world. Our typical installation, these are fairly small villages, so it's a 30 to 40 kilowatt peak. We have some that can go up to 300. But the typical one is on the lower side, and we're putting 3 to 4 days of storage. So we're looking at 48 to 72 hours of storage and providing energy 365 days a year without having to have a diesel generator supporting the microgrid. Next slide. So if you look at, just last year alone, we deployed in Indonesia over 6 gigawatt hours to these villages and in the telecommunications towers as well. Villagers are really not depending anymore from diesel and lead acid batteries, and we have created over 500 jobs. We have a licensed regional manufacturer there now, and it's providing this service, the products for Indonesian and the Asian countries. And then on the other side, the villages now are becoming much more prosperous. They're starting to create an economy because there is power available. They can cool down the fish and start sending it to other locations, and start doing rice threshers and things like that, where they can start doing these economies, and that's been received very well under the Indonesian government. Next slide. So the next one I want to talk about, another case completely different. That's in Madagascar. It is a town that is located around 330 miles away from the capital. Madagascar is a country that has 26 million people, of which only 23% have access to electricity. And when you go to a rural area, 5% may have access to electricity. So in 2017, we partnered with the Caterpillar dealer over there, Henry Fraze, and USTDA to do a pilot project. And this is in a town called Belobaca. And you could see the microgrid there. It's in front of a little community center supporting the village. So we have designed that for 400 households, and it's a fairly small microgrid as well. And it's 83 kilowatts with 315 kilowatt hours. And we put in around 100 poles to be able to deliver the energy to the different households. Next slide, please. So this one is a different model. It is a pay-as-you-go model, and we've proven that it works very well, actually. So from having a community that really didn't have a whole lot going, now they have some threshers in there. They have different things that they're doing to create an economy, and it is a for-profit model, so it's proving that it is something that can actually work. And it's based on their phone system. So if they need electricity, they just add money to a certain account on their phone, and off they go. They get electricity, and they continue to operate. So this is we're pretty good. We've gotten some great compliments from the company that is the EPC and the energy provider, which is the Caterpillar dealership. So really good. We've heard recently that The World Bank is doing, I think, 99 more villages out there. So we're looking forward to continue to partner with different institutions to move into these rural communities and change their lives. Next slide. Can you move to the next slide? Oops, doesn't want to move. Oh, okay. So talking about non-technical key barriers. This is a big deal when you go out of the country into these different parts of the world where you have big financial risk. That's some of the things that we always are thinking about. What is the risk about on these countries? What is the investment risk? How is that protected? You know, how much engagement the local government and municipalities are involved in the project and in providing protections. International development banks, how engaged they are, how can we use them to minimize these type of risk and provide a lower cost of electricity to the end user, so you can accelerate the growth of these communities. The other part is policy, really understanding well the energy regulation on each of these countries and the transparency. Those are real things that we need to be looking at when we're out there. Also, how do we get information? What is the right network to obtain information? A lot of information is not easily accessible, and by the time you get it, you could be, you may have lost the opportunity or have an impact on your project. Who are the government influencers? Those are areas that really need to go there and finding the right partner that can help navigate a lot of these barriers and operational risks. Those, a lot of times, when you go to these countries, you just find things that a lot of times we take for granted, and those are real causes of failing. So finding these partners are really critical. Who are the local competitors and influencers that may impact your project? Understanding that environment, and then you go into the actual village, and you get into really basics, skill labor. You're out there thousands of miles away from a location, and how do you communicate with them? How do you solve problems? It's really making it simple and finding the right skills and training them and to minimize the overall cost of the project. So with this, I want to pass it to the World Bank. I know they're going to be able to really help us navigate through this with their influence around the world. So if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ray. That was a really interesting presentation. So great to see some real world examples that are just so tangible as to how energy storage is making impacts in these communities. And, Patrick Soon-Shiong, NAN's lead investor, spoke at ESNA last year, and we interviewed him as part of the wrap up. You can check out the video on esnaexpo.com. And I just thought one of the most memorable things he said during that speech was that his goal in investing in energy storage technology is to end world famine. So I just think this technology has such potential to offer so much in terms of economic development in different parts of the world that, I thought that just really hit that message home. All right, next up, we're going to go to Fernando and Heather from the World Bank. Fernando and Heather, please take it away.
Well, hello everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Mark, and thanks to Strategen for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to present today at this webinar. My colleague Heather Worley and I will be presenting today this new partnership that the World Bank is convening on energy storage to accelerate storage deployment in developing countries. If we can go to the next slide. I will jump over the outline so we can go to the next slide. All right, so first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the World Bank's Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, or ESMAP. This is where we work and where the Secretariat of the Energy Storage Partnership will be housed. ESMAP is also a partnership with other 18 partners, mostly country governments and some philanthropies, to help reduce poverty through sustainable energy solutions. It is constituted as a multi-donor trust fund at the World Bank, dedicated to providing technical assistance and global knowledge products on a number of energy-related topics, such as energy access, renewable energy, energy efficiency, subsidy reform, governance, markets and planning, and also data. The main activities supported by ESMAP include informing development financing, so these are the World Bank investment operations, informing policy, providing strategic advice to governments, and increasing client capacity, and also developing global knowledge products and innovative solutions to tackle the most pressing energy challenges. Next slide, please. So the World Bank has been supporting the energy sector in developing countries for many decades, including providing financial support for investments in batteries associated with mini-grids, among many other types of investments. But it is at this point that we feel that energy storage could be a truly game changer for developing countries in order to address the dual challenge of bridging the access gap and decarbonizing the economy. The access problem has been improving steadily, but as of today, there are still over 1 billion people with no access to electricity, and renewable investments need to increase by 6 by 2030 if we are to meet the 7th Sustainable Development Goal of ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. This is a goal for which we all have to join efforts, and it is not a coincidence that one of the channels established in SDG 7 to accomplish this goal is to enhance international cooperation, which is something that the bank has been doing for many years. Next slide, please. Now, the motivation for focusing now on energy storage comes very much from our experience and our dialogue with governments and dispatch centers in our client countries. As demand grows rapidly in many of our countries and we work with them to bridge the access gap, we need to support them providing firm capacity solutions. And here, I emphasize the word firm. Firm capacity means that capacity is available 24/7, and this is particularly difficult when it comes to meeting the peak demand. Unfortunately, the resources available in many of our countries are very limited, or they might take many years to develop, as it is the case of hydro, or there are also substantial barriers to unlock some of them, as it might happen with energy imports. So these factors create a situation where the preferred solutions by some of these countries is to quickly provide firm capacity with liquid fuels like HFO and diesel. These fossil fuel solutions bring in turn a lot of problems, and not just environmental, but also geopolitical, in terms of higher dependence from other countries for fuel supply, macroeconomic with a high exposure to oil prices, supply disruptions associated with corruption, and maintenance issues related to the lack of availability of adequate capacity or parts. The good news is that solutions based on renewables and energy storage can displace a large volume of some of these fuel being burned, and also potentially replace some of the units that are being used now to provide firm capacity, increasing the number of options available. Next slide, please. So whether you're looking at distributed storage, mini grids, or large grids, when we are talking to our clients, we know that the modularity and rapid deployment of some energy storage solutions makes them a viable option to provide many services and applications. For instance, in distribution networks, storage can shape the load curve and defer new distribution assets. In mini grids, it can maximize the utilization of renewable assets and minimize the need for fossil fuels. And in large utility scale applications, it can firm up renewable generation and provide ancillary services. We know that storage can do many good things, but it also has a lot of questions. Next slide, please. What we have found is that if we want to leverage the full power of energy storage in developing countries and accelerate battery deployment, we will need to first continue decreasing the cost of battery technologies. Remember that this is an asset that is 100% CapEx. We will need to use technologies that are friendly to the environment and adapted to the applications and conditions that are found in developing countries. We will also need to adopt policies and regulations that guarantee that batteries can be connected to the grid and that they recover their full cost. And ultimately, we will need to expand the market to developing countries. The World Bank has already financed 0.75 gigawatt hours out of the total 5 gigawatt hours currently deployed in developing countries. So we feel like we are well positioned for action. Next slide, please. So in September 2018, last year, the former World Bank president announced in the One Climate Summit that the World Bank Group will mobilize $5 billion to accelerate investments in battery storage. This would include support the adoption of policies and regulations to guarantee the cost recovery of assets, support firm power auctions for hybrid projects. These are solar PV and wind projects with batteries. Also finance large-scale pilot projects to reduce the risk perceived by new technologies. And these technologies are the ones that that were just presented, that can offer better performance than mainstream technologies. Support also mini grids and distributed applications, and also finance standalone batteries as a grid asset. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, besides the need to open new markets and reduce costs, there is a number of important challenges and knowledge gaps that need to be addressed. So right after the announcement between November 2018 and March this year, we consulted with over 100 organizations ranging from private companies, research institutions, industry alliances, governments, international organizations, and they all agreed that there is a strong need for action to address these important knowledge gaps around energy storage, and these could be addressed by an energy storage partnership.
So I was very glad, this is Heather, hello everyone, and I'll just take another minute or two. I was very glad to hear Julian mention the need to remove barriers and address some of the challenges in bringing the market to developing countries, because that's exactly what we want to do with this partnership that we're presenting to you today. Next slide, please. Our goal is to create a platform for collective effort so that these challenges and barriers that have been mentioned can be addressed. So that may be increasing the flexibility of power systems by using storage so that countries can integrate larger shares of VRE. It may be looking at ways to use modularity, as Ray was describing, so that the storage solutions can be quick to deploy. Next slide, please. I know you can all download these slides, so I will go very quickly so we have plenty of time for questions. This slide, where we're talking about the partnership as a catalyzer of projects. It's basically just showing. Fernando mentioned that we spoke to hundreds of organizations in the past few months to try to determine whether there was need for something like an international energy storage partnership, and everyone we spoke with was unanimous. Addressing some of these barriers, getting the world ready for the geographic diversity that we're seeing in the market, which Julian also mentioned, it's going to require a collaborative effort. And we can go to the next slide, please. That slide was meant to show the sweet spot where the energy storage partnership could be useful to our client countries. This slide is basically just saying the World Bank and our partners are going to take a technology neutral approach. We want to be responsive to the demands that our country clients have. We're kind of agnostic on what the storage technology is. We want to be sure that some of these, some of the important attributes that we know our clients need are being met. Next slide, please. So I'll quickly just talk about, in the next two slides, I'm going to talk about what the partnership is intended to do. So we want to take a global public goods approach to energy storage solutions. So we want to have a better understanding of the emerging markets' needs and what their technical requirements are. We want to be sure that there's responsible innovation. We had a conference in Cape Town that we were lucky to have Mark with us, and we heard from one of our colleagues in South Africa who said, let's be careful not to bring a bunch of technology that might be obsolete in a few years to the African continent. So we want to be sure that we're bringing things that are environmentally sustainable, as Fernando said. We want to be sure that there's responsible innovation. We want to be sure that investors can be attracted and that the policies are going in the right direction. We want to ensure that a lot more information sharing and a lot more transparency is in the system. And as Ray mentioned, there are plenty of opportunities for multilateral cooperation and for investment banks and international investments to get involved, and we'd like to help make that happen. Next slide, please. So you can imagine when we spoke with hundreds of people in the industry and watchers and researchers, we needed to distill the information we were hearing, and Mark and the team at Strategen have been so helpful to us in understanding where some of those gaps are that could be filled by the energy storage partnership. And this slide is just looking at the 4 tracks that we envision will be the focus of the energy storage partnership work. And at the moment we're inviting partners to join us, and we would love to hear from any of you who would be interested in collaborating with us. We see a track on technology, RD&D, applications and standards. We see a lot of need for system integration and planning tools. We know that policies and regulation, and that's come up many times today, they're going to be important, and we want to talk and look at in depth at some of the enabling infrastructure that will be needed. Next slide. So here's a look at what we hope to be doing with the partners. And we think that some of the study tours we could arrange to some of the facilities and locations where research is underway that we would love to take our clients to see. We want to do a research paper on grid integration and small power systems. And we're going to have a first business meeting in Paris in June so that together we can determine what the research priorities are. We will be creating a website and a sharing platform to talk about the knowledge and experience that's being gained. And we'll be conceiving pilot projects where we can demonstrate new tech and what might be useful and what might be innovative for our clients. Last slide is the next one, please. So we just wanted to show you this timeline to give you a sense of the consultations we've had on 3 continents. We've talked to people at IEA and their technology collaboration partnerships, and we'll be having our first business meeting in Paris in June, as I mentioned. And we are welcoming as many partners as would like to join us, and we're happy to take any questions. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Fernanda. That was a really interesting presentation, and really appreciate the great dialogue and see how we have so many countries that are interested in this technology and so many different private sector developers looking to deploy around the world. So now we're going to move to the Q&A section, and want to thank everyone who's given us questions so far. You can still enter in questions into the questions box if you want to ask one. I'm going to kick things off today. I actually have a question to World Bank. You mentioned that you are interested in having as many folks participate in the Energy Source Partnerships program as possible. How do they do that? Is it just through attending the Paris June meeting? Can they contact you directly? What's the best way for people to get involved?
Thank you for asking that, Mark. We would love to hear from potential partners directly. And on that last slide, you see the contact information for Fernando and me. We would love to invite any potential partners to the meeting that we're planning, but I think the first step would be get in touch with us and let's have a conversation. Fernando and I are working the phones like crazy trying to figure out exactly who would be interested in joining. And what we have in mind is along those 4 tracks on the previous slide, some partners may want to be engaged in one or another. They may have a certain preference for looking at recycling or policies or contributing some of their research. We're open to any and all in-kind contributions. We are not in fundraising mode. We are in connecting ideas and connecting people and sharing information mode. So we'd be happy to hear from anyone interested.
Thank you, Heather. Actually, a follow-up question on that is, in all these consultations you've been having with countries, what are the types of questions you've been getting from them about the program and how it can best help them?
So policies are coming up often. Regulatory best practices are coming up often. Procurement methods, and these are all things that I think everybody on this call is probably hearing a lot about from people who are working on storage solutions. But I think, so those are some of the biggies. There's a lot of skepticism, I think, in some of our client countries. You know, these are utilities that are not running as efficiently, to say the least, as some of the utilities we might know in Europe and North America. So when you're in a very challenged utility environment and when your grid is weak, I think some of the questions our clients have are a little informed by some of their skepticism. They may want to see some proof. So I think demonstrating, showing our clients where things are really working and creating some of those policy best practices and sharing good regulatory experiences would be good. I will hand it to Fernando, who may want to say one last thing on that.
No, maybe just one comment on cost. That's also, of course, a very big issue, and that's where we as the World Bank try to support our countries with financing.
Great, thank you. Okay, now I've got a question for Ray. Ray, this one's kind of an interesting one, and I think you probably have some experience with this. So let's suppose that your company is trying to bring a new energy storage technology into a new country. What's the best way to approach that country's regulator and try and convince them that this technology is going to be viable, it's here to stay, it's going to be clean, it's not going to create environmental issues for them, and that they should actually take it seriously and change the regulatory framework to accommodate that technology. What's been your experience in working in places like Indonesia on those types of issues?
So the first thing is really getting the right people and the government connected, right? That's that makes a big difference. Once you have that is education, right? Education and showing them real applications. A lot of times they're quite reluctant to just listen if they don't see something locally or something where they can go pretty close and see it in real time. And that's really helped us a lot, starting in these countries. That alone just creates a lot of credibility because once you start in one of these countries, it becomes a good basis to expand to other places. But cracking the first one, it is quite challenging, just because if you don't have that international experience, it makes it difficult. And also, using agencies like the World Bank is a good example, right? They are looking at a lot of different technologies, and they are in every country, and they can also help you get in a country if they understand your technology pretty well.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question for you, Ray. How do you deal with issues like counterparty risk and energy theft and issues like that when you're trying to implement some of these pay-as-you-go models, like the one that you implemented in Madagascar?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we're actually going through some of that in another location that I can't disclose. So what's interesting is we have learned recently there is some meters that are designed against theft, and they're pretty clever actually. They're not cheap, unfortunately, but there is already solutions out there where you could put a meter and avoid the theft from the generator. That's one area of concern. The other one is just theft on the technology. Use a technology that is not used, that doesn't have anything of interest. For example, lead acid batteries. One of the reasons we got into telecom is because they were stealing all the lead acid batteries, and our technology cannot be stolen. There's nothing of interest, and the unit won't operate if they take us out. So that using a technology that is theft proof is also a key advantage to solve that concern.
Great, thank you. Okay, got a couple of questions now for Julian. Julian, from all this research you've done on emerging markets, what do you think some of the most promising countries in Southeast Asia are in terms of the stationary battery systems for C&I?
For sure. I mean, that's a really good question, and it's obviously a very diverse region. I think when we maybe go beyond a little bit beyond C&I, but across the region, I think there's some really interesting opportunities emerging, particularly in the Philippines, where there's a big regulatory and policy push, not just to enable more microgrids for island electrification, but also to develop the corresponding frameworks to allow energy storage to provide frequency regulation and other balancing services. So I definitely see that as a crucial opportunity. We've also been seeing quite significant investment from a kind of government or funding side in Singapore, which is running a number of key trials and pilot programs to enable storage to be developed there. And similarly in Thailand, although that is more of a front of the meter opportunity, where the main utility company and transmission and distribution system operator is developing energy storage there. So I think it's a very mixed opportunity, but generally across all these emerging markets, there's a few kind of core drivers that will push C&I customers towards energy storage. I mean, the first one is really current cost of electricity supply through diesel generators. So if they have consistent or common outages, or if they actually are completely off grid, That's where energy storage paired with solar, but also in a hybrid model with diesel generators, can really come into their own. And I think more and more what we're seeing is that where we do have critical power quality issues, energy storage can even be more advantageous to those traditional solutions.
Great, thanks, Julian. Okay, well, we are just about out of time here, so I want to just wrap things up by saying that the slides will be available online on stratogen.com/webinars within the next couple of hours. The recording takes a little bit longer. We should have that posted by tomorrow. We will be posting everyone's contact information, including Ray's, which I don't believe was in the presentation, to our website so people can get in touch if they've got further questions or anything like that. And then the last thing is I just want to make sure that everyone is invited to ESNA 2019. It's November 5th through 7th in San Diego. We've had now for several years this really remarkable global grid transformation track where we're talking about issues just like what we talked about today on the call. The global grid track is going to be held on November 6th. We've got this California, Germany energy conference happening on the 5th as well. So a lot going on at the event, and we'd love to have you join us. Thanks everybody for attending today's webinar, and we are very excited to have had this conversation. Please take the survey, give us your feedback, let us know what we can be doing on future webinars and what you think we should improve on webinars like the one we had today. Thanks very much, and we're going to be signing off. Take care, everyone.